I didn't raise my voice. Not once. When I found out what my son had done, what he and his wife had been quietly arranging while I was lying in a hospital bed, I didn't slam the phone down. I didn't call a lawyer in a panic. I sat in that hospital chair, looked out the window at the parking lot, and I smiled. People who know me would understand that smile. My late wife used to call it my quiet weather face. She said it meant a storm was coming, but the kind that takes its time. My name is Earl. I'm 63 years old. For most of my adult life, people around town knew me as one thing: the man who ran Hargrove Feed and Supply out on Route 9 in Clarksburg, West Virginia. A small operation, modest. I wore the same canvas jacket for 11 years. I drove a 2009 Ford F-150 with a crack in the passenger side mirror that I kept meaning to fix. I ate lunch at the same diner every Tuesday, a patty melt and black coffee, and I tipped $3 because that's what I'd always done, and the woman who served me had been serving me since her hair was dark brown and mine wasn't gray yet. I was, by every visible measure, a simple man, what my son never bothered to learn, because he stopped being curious about me sometime around his 25th birthday, was that simple and small are not the same thing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My son's name is Trent. He's 34. His wife's name is Melissa. They live in a nice house in Morgantown. Nicer than they can comfortably afford, if I'm being honest, which I always try to be. Trent works in commercial real estate. He wears shirts with the collars open just enough to show a gold chain his wife bought him for their anniversary. He drives a leased Audi. He talks about building a portfolio the way some men talk about building a family, with great seriousness and very little actual follow-through. I don't say these things to be cruel. I say them because they matter to the story. They explain why. When I got sick last spring, Trent saw something other than his father in that hospital bed. I had a cardiac event in late March. The doctors called it a significant episode. My heart threw a fit, basically years of bad coffee and worse hours, and for about 48 hours the outcome was genuinely uncertain. I was sedated for part of it. I had signed a medical power of attorney the previous year, after my doctor nudged me about it. I listed Trent as my agent. He was my only child. It seemed like the right thing to do. The document also included a limited financial power of attorney, specifically for managing my checking and savings accounts if I became incapacitated for more than 72 hours. Standard language. My attorney had included it because I'd asked for it. I wanted someone to be able to pay my utility bills if I was unconscious for a week. I was incapacitated for 4 days. In those 4 days, my son apparently made a series of phone calls that had nothing to do with my utilities. I found out on a Thursday. I was sitting up in the hospital bed, eating a cup of gelatin that tasted like it had been manufactured in 1987, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ed Flanagan, who runs the agricultural co-op 3 miles from my property. Ed's not a man who texts. He calls, usually at inconvenient times, and talks for 20 minutes about his corn yields before getting to the point. So when I saw his name on a text message, I knew something had happened. The text said, "Earl, heard you're doing better. Also heard your boy put the Route 9 land on the market. Just wanted to make sure you knew. Sorry if I'm overstepping." I read it twice. Then I set the gelatin down and looked out the window for a long time. The Route 9 property was 61 acres. The main building, the feed store, had been in operation since 1987, the same year as that gelatin probably. But the land itself had been in my family since my grandfather bought it for back taxes in 1954. It wasn't just a store. It was the place my father taught me to drive a tractor. It was the place I proposed to my wife, standing in the east field in the rain because I'd planned to do it at dinner and lost my nerve and ended up blurting it out when we were walking back to the truck. It was the place I scattered half her ashes when she passed 4 years ago, because she asked me to, and my son had put it on the market without asking me. I didn't call Trent right away. I called my attorney first. A woman named Patricia, who has handled my affairs for 19 years and who I trust more than almost anyone alive. She pulled up the filing within the hour. Trent had used the financial power of attorney to authorize a listing agreement with a regional real estate brokerage. The listing price was $1.2 million. The property had been on the market for 3 days. "Can he do this?" I asked. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "He used the document correctly in a narrow technical sense," she said. "But a financial POA for bill payment doesn't typically extend to real property transactions. This is overreach. Potentially significant overreach." "Potentially," I said. "I'll have a cease and desist to the brokerage by end of day," she said. "Wait," I said. Another pause. "Oh. Wait," I said again. "I want to understand what he's doing first. All of it. Then we'll talk about what to do." She knew me well enough not to argue. I was discharged 2 days later. Trent came to pick me up. Arrived with Melissa, both of them in the Audi, both wearing the particular expression of people who are performing concern. He hugged me in the hospital lobby. He smelled like his expensive cologne. He said he was so relieved. He said he'd been so scared. I looked at him and I said, "I appreciate you coming." And I meant it, actually. I appreciated him coming. I was watching him very carefully. On the drive home, Trent mentioned almost as an aside that he'd been handling a few things while I was in the hospital, just making sure everything was taken care of, he said. I looked out the passenger window. What kind of things? Just logistics. Bills. Making sure the store was covered. That was thoughtful, I said. Melissa glanced at him from the driver's seat. Something passed between them. A quick, small look. I caught it in the reflection of the window. When we got to my house, Trent helped me inside and made a show of getting me settled. Then he sat across from me in the living room with his hands on his knees and said he wanted to talk about the future. I said, all right. He said that he'd been thinking, and he wanted me to know this was coming from a place of love, that the Route 9 property might be a burden going forward, that managing a retail operation at my age, with my health, didn't make sense, that he and Melissa had done some research and felt the land was underperforming as an asset, that selling it could give me real financial security. I watched him say all of this. His wife sat beside him, nodding at the right moments. I said, "Where did you get 1.2 million? He blinked. What? The listing price. Where did that number come from? We had it appraised, he said. A commercial appraiser looked at it. That's fair market value looked at it. That's fair market value, that appraisal, I said. Who commissioned it? A small hesitation. I did. While you were, I was trying to get ahead of things. Be prepared. When? I asked. What? When did you commission the appraisal? Before or after my episode? His jaw tightened slightly. Right after. I wanted to understand what you had, in case I died, I said. That's not Trent. I kept my voice very level. You commissioned a property appraisal and contacted a real estate brokerage while I was sedated in a cardiac ICU. He started to say something about my best interests. He used the phrase worst-case planning. He said he and Melissa had talked at length about what they thought I would want. I said, and what did you think I would want? Financial security, he said. Like I said. I looked at him for a moment. Did you ever ask me what I wanted? He opened his mouth. Not then, I said. Not during those 4 days, obviously. I mean ever. In the past 5 years. Did you ever sit down with me and ask what I planned to do with the Route 9 property? With any of my property? He said he'd always assumed I'd sell eventually. I said, what gave you that impression? He didn't have an answer for that. I told him I was tired and needed to rest. He looked like he wanted to say more. Melissa put her hand on his arm. They left. I sat in the quiet for a while after they drove away. Then I called Patricia. Now, I said, what happened next unfolded slowly, the way things do when they're being done correctly. Patricia sent the cease and desist to the brokerage the following morning. The listing came down within 48 hours. The brokerage was cooperative once they understood the scope of what they'd nearly been party to. Listing property without valid authorization is not something real estate professionals take lightly, and ours weren't bad people. They'd been misled. Trent called me that night. He was not calm this time. He said I was being irrational. He said he'd been trying to help. He said I was making him look bad in the community. He said, and this is the part I'll remember for a long time, that I was just a feed store guy and that I didn't understand how money actually works. I let him talk. I've always believed you learn more by listening. When he finally ran out of steam, I said, "Are you done?" He said he wanted to talk about the future. Again. He said the property was going to sit there and depreciate. He said I had no succession plan. He said I needed to face reality. He used the phrase, "poor old farmer." Not meanly, he would probably say, just matter-of-factly. The way you'd describe something that isn't quite keeping up with the times. I said, "I'll tell you what. I'd like you and Melissa to come to a meeting next week. There are some people I'd like you to meet." He was suspicious, but he was also curious. Trent has always been curious about money, even when he pretended not to be. He said, "What kind of meeting?" I said, "A business meeting. Thursday at noon. I'll text you the address." The address I sent him was on the 14th floor of an office building in Charleston. I want to explain something about the feed store and about my life that requires going back about 22 years. When I was 41, I had a conversation with a man named Douglas Pruitt, who ran a small agricultural consulting firm out of Beckley. We'd met through a mutual friend at a farm bureau meeting. Douglas had an idea, not a complicated one, but a good one, about creating a regional cooperative purchasing network for independent feed and supply operations across the mid-Atlantic. Instead of every small store negotiating separately with manufacturers, we'd aggregate demand, negotiate collectively, and pass the savings to members. Simple, proven in other industries. Nobody had done it right in ours. I put in $40,000 of my own money. Douglas put in his expertise and connections. We spent 2 years building it quietly, operating out of a storage room in the back of my feed store. By year 4, we had 19 member stores. By year 8, we had 63. By year 12, we had a full office, a logistics division, and a technology platform that processed $18 million in annual transactions. I kept my name off the public materials. Douglas was the face of the company. I was comfortable with that. I was running the feed store. I was raising my son. I didn't need my name on anything. I needed my share of the equity, which I'd negotiated carefully at the beginning, and which had appreciated considerably over the years. We sold the company in January, 11 months before my cardiac episode, to a regional agricultural services conglomerate based in Ohio. The sale closed at $31.4 million. My share, based on my equity stake, was $9.2 million after taxes and fees. That money was sitting in a trust managed by a fiduciary, quietly earning returns, while my son was calling me a poor old farmer and listing my land without my permission. I also still owned the 61 acres, and I owned the building, and the equipment, and a small portfolio of agricultural bonds I'd been quietly accumulating for 15 years. But Trent didn't know any of that, because he'd never asked. Thursday came. He and Melissa arrived at the Charleston office building 5 minutes late. He was wearing a good suit. She had dressed up. I noticed this with some sadness. They'd prepared the way you prepare for something you expect to benefit you. The conference room had 6 people in it. Patricia, my fiduciary, a man named Harris, a representative from the Ohio conglomerate who'd flown in that morning, and 2 individuals from the West Virginia Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. Trent looked at the room and then looked at me. I said, "Sit down, son." He sat down. son. He sat beside him. She had stopped smiling. Patricia began. She laid out, very calmly and without drama, the timeline of what Trent had done. The appraisal, commissioned before any reasonable person could characterize my condition as stable. The call to the brokerage, placed while I was still on telemetry. The listing agreement, signed using a power of attorney document that had been granted for bill payment, not real property transactions. The 3 days the property had been actively marketed to buyers without my knowledge or consent. Then she said, "This constitutes unauthorized disposition of real property under West Virginia Code. In plain terms, your son attempted to sell land he had no legal authority to sell." The room was quiet. Trent said, "I was acting in his best interest." Patricia said, "That's a legal determination, not a personal one. The law doesn't recognize best interest as authorization for real property transfer." Melissa said very quietly, "We didn't know." The representative from the AG's office looked at her gently and said, "Mom, your signature is on the listing agreement as a co-authorizing party." Melissa looked at Trent. That same look from the car, but different this time. Harder. Harris, my fiduciary, then spoke. He presented an overview of my financial situation. Not everything, but enough. The trust, the sale proceeds, the bond portfolio, the appraised value of the Route 9 property, which his firm had independently assessed at $1.8 million, not the $1.2 million Trent's appraiser had returned. A discrepancy Patricia noted was worth examining. Trent's face went through several changes during this presentation. Confusion first. Then something approaching calculation, which faded quickly when he realized the numbers being discussed were not numbers he'd be touching. Then a kind of hollowed-out stillness. He said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." He looked at me. "Dad, you didn't know," I said, "because you never asked. In 34 years, you never once sat down with me and said, 'Dad, how are things going? What are you working on? What does the future look like for you?' You assumed. You looked at the canvas jacket and the cracked mirror and the Tuesday patty melt, and you decided you already knew everything there was to know about me." He was very still. "And maybe that would have been fine," I said. "People make assumptions, but when I was lying in a hospital bed, when I was actually fighting to stay alive, you didn't call my attorney. You didn't call my accountant. You called a real estate broker." I let that sit. "That's what I can't move past," I said. "Not the paperwork, not the listing. It's that when you thought I might die, your first thought was about the land." His eyes were wet. I hadn't expected that. It didn't change anything, but I noticed it. The AG representatives explained the situation to both of them in plain terms. The unauthorized filing would remain on record. Whether the office chose to pursue further action would depend on several factors, including cooperation and restitution. Melissa, specifically, was advised to retain her own counsel, separately from Trent. That last part landed. I watched her absorb it. Patricia slid a document across the table. It was an agreement. Not a punishment, she explained, but a resolution. Trent would formally disclaim any future claim to the Route 9 property and acknowledge in writing that the listing had been unauthorized. Melissa would do the same. In exchange, I would not pursue civil damages for the carrying costs and disruptions caused by the 3-day listing. I would also retain the existing estate plan, which left Trent a portion of my estate, reduced from the original. I'd updated the documents with Patricia the week after I got home from the hospital. There was a long silence. Trent said, "You're really doing this." I said, "I'm offering you a clean resolution. That's more than most people in my position would do." He said, "Why?" I thought about that for a moment. "Because you're my son," I said, "and I'm not interested in destroying you. I am interested in you understanding what you did." He signed. Melissa signed, though her hand was shaking, and she didn't look at him while she did it. We didn't hug when the meeting ended. He walked past me toward the elevator, and then he stopped and turned around, and he said, The smile. At the hospital. You already knew, didn't you? I said, Ed Flanagan texted me. He nodded slowly. So you had all of this ready? I had Patricia, I said. I've always had Patricia. He got in the elevator. Melissa followed. The doors closed. I stayed in Charleston that night, had dinner alone at a quiet restaurant near the Capitol building. A ribeye, a glass of bourbon, a slice of chess pie for dessert. I sat by the window and watched the street for a while. People walking dogs. A couple arguing in a friendly way about which way to turn. A kid on a bicycle navigating the sidewalk with great seriousness. I thought about my wife. I thought about how she would have handled this, probably with more grace than I did, and also with considerably more tears. She was better at crying than I am. I've always admired that about her. I tend to go quiet instead. I thought about the Eastfield in the rain, about how I planned to propose at dinner at a proper restaurant, with the ring already in my jacket pocket, and then we went for a walk after the dinner fell through, because she'd gotten a call that her mother was in the hospital. Nothing serious, as it turned out, and we ended up walking back across the property in the dark and the rain, and the ring was still in my pocket, and I thought, what am I waiting for? What better moment is there going to be than this one, with this woman in this rain on this land? So I asked her. She said yes before I finished the sentence. The Eastfield is still mine. The property is still mine. I'm banged to the store most mornings by 7, in the same canvas jacket, drinking the same bad coffee. I've started looking into what it would take to convert part of the acreage to an agritourism operation. There's a woman in the county extension office who's been after me about it for 2 years, and I'm starting to think she might be right. Trent and I don't talk much now. We've spoken twice since the meeting. Short calls, careful words, the kind of conversation where both people are still figuring out what's possible. I don't know what comes next with him. I'd like something to come next. I'm not closing that door. Melissa filed for divorce 6 weeks after the meeting. I heard this through a family friend, and not through Trent, which told me something about where things stood between them. I won't pretend I was surprised. What I will tell you is this: I am not a poor old farmer. I never was, but I was also never embarrassed to look like one. Because the man I am was built in fields and feed stores and early mornings and small margins and choosing what to hold on to and what to let go. My grandfather paid back taxes on 61 acres of West Virginia clay in 1954. He didn't know what it would become. He just knew it was worth holding. I understand that now better than I ever have. If you're watching this and you have someone in your life who you've quietly decided you've already figured out, I'd ask you to reconsider. The people who've been around the longest, who seem the most ordinary, who wear the same jacket and eat the same lunch every Tuesday. Sometimes they are exactly what they appear to be, and sometimes there's something you never bothered to find out. Either way, they deserve to be asked. I've had a lot of time to sit with all of this. Not brood over it, I'm not built for brooding, but actually sit with it the way you sit with something that changed the shape of your thinking. What Trent did came from something I'd been watching build for years and choosing not to name. He'd grown up watching me work hard for what looked like very little, and somewhere along the way he'd decided that was the whole story. Not the beginning of a story, not a chapter, the whole thing. And when you decide you already know someone completely, you stop paying attention to them. You stop asking. You stop wondering. And that's when the dangerous assumptions start filling in the gaps. I'm not saying what he did was excusable. Listing my land while I was on a cardiac monitor, that wasn't an accident of ignorance. That was a choice. People make choices out of who they've decided they are, and Trent had decided he was someone who understood money better than his father. He'd decided that being practical and being cold were the same virtue. They're not. They never are. But here's what I keep coming back to. Every action he took had a consequence that followed as naturally as rain follows clouds. He underestimated me, so he moved carelessly. so he left a trail. He left a trail so Patricia could document every step. He documented every step, so the resolution was airtight. None of what happened to him at that conference table in Charleston was manufactured by me. I just let the sequence complete itself. That's not cleverness. That's patience. And patience is something I learned not from any book or philosophy or course. I learned it from 61 acres of West Virginia clay that my grandfather held on to when no one thought it was worth holding. There's something I want to say about Melissa, because I think about her sometimes. She made choices too, and she's facing consequences too. But I also watched her face in that conference room when she realized the full shape of what she'd been pulled into. There was a moment, just a second, where she looked less like a co-conspirator and more like a woman who had trusted the wrong person's version of events. I don't know her story well enough to judge it. I just know that moment existed, and it stayed with me. What I believe, from this life, from this experience, from watching my wife move through the world with more grace than I ever managed, is that the quality of your choices over time is the only real thing you build. Not the portfolio, not the leased car, not the open collar and the gold chain. Those things are just weather. What you actually build is the kind of person you become when something goes wrong, when someone betrays you, when you're in a hospital bed and someone is on the phone with a broker. I built a company in a storage room for 22 years. I built it quietly, without needing anyone to see it, because the building was the point, not the recognition. That's the only way anything real gets built. Slowly, without an audience, for reasons that have nothing to do with what other people think you're worth. If there's anything I'd want someone to take from my story, it's this. Don't let anyone's low estimate of you become your operating budget. Not your son's, not your neighbor's, not your own, on the bad mornings. You keep the canvas jacket. You keep the cracked mirror. You keep eating the patty melt on Tuesdays. And you keep building quietly, patiently, with your name off the materials if that's what it takes, because what you're building is yours. And when the moment comes, it will speak for itself. The East Field still has her ashes in it. I walked out there last week, just before dark. The grass was long, and the light was going sideways across the hills the way it does in May. I stood there for a while. It's all still mine.